Hi, everybody. Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine. I am your co-host, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director of GW Center for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine in Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Care. It's a bit of an unusual podcast today. First of all, we generally don't engage in discussing media articles and taking particular topics on, but this was a triggering article for me and for lots of us. And I'm particularly going to mention Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, which is a national organization of physicians, many of them in academia, who are trying to say, look, we have to legalize medical cannabis for the whole country, but we have to do it right. We have to put regulations in place so that the cannabis use is safe, that it's well guided, that the public and the practitioners are well educated in the topic and understand the harms and benefits and can appropriately utilize this tool for general good of the public, primarily in the healthcare field, but also recognizing that adult use of cannabis is inevitable. A lot of people are using it, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with this if it doesn't lead to abuse and variety of societal problems. But also understanding that probably some of it's going to be unavoidable, just like with alcohol. And yet we generally believe that the overall amount of good from legalizing cannabis is going to be good. But then there's articles periodically in the general media that come up. And, I'm going to, without further ado, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share my screen. So those of you who are going to watch this on the YouTube are going to have access to the pictures, to the actual video, but otherwise I'm going to talk you through everything here. So this article that just came out in the New York Times titled Legalizing Marijuana is a Big Mistake by Ross Douthat, published on May 17, 2023 in New York Times. So as you, and many of you, you're probably relying on a high quality, large media outlets, including New York Times. And unfortunately, I don't think we can do that anymore. I think if the garbage like this shows up in the major US newspapers, and whether it's in print or online, it's very concerning. It's concerning that the journalism of New York Times is deteriorated. It's concerning that garbage like this ended up in the leading journal, in the leading media. And hopefully over time, this, I don't know, I don't think they will pull the article, but I hope somebody will provide a significant comment. I know Peter Greenspoon that we interviewed just recently, just a week ago, and you will see his podcast coming up shortly, managed to get his op-ed very quickly. But I thought that Joan Smith and I have also tried to put op-ed, but we were a little bit late. And we presented the data from our book showing basically how not just incorrect, but the direct lie and misrepresentation of data. So they'll just spend a couple of minutes, go right into the article. So first of all, the article opens up with a statement that 2/3 of Americans support legalization of cannabis in one way or another. That is correct. But then the author says, but that's a mistake. And it's a mistake because in contrast to previous data, quote unquote, public is unaware of all the harms, including, and then things just deteriorate and take a very bad turn. Basically, this author claims that cannabis, marijuana, increases opioid-induced mortality, and that in contrast to all of the prior data that shows no, incorrect, and I will show you the data. And what's really fascinating is how you can milk the data, how you can misrepresent the data. So this author basically cites an obscured paper that is not medically relevant. It is a paper in the Journal of Health Economics that found that legal, I'm quoting the author of New York Times article, legal medical marijuana, particularly when available through retail dispensaries, is associated with higher opioid mortality. Now, I took due diligence. I went in and analyzed this article, and you can do the same. You can click on the paper here. It will take you to the National Library of Medicine online to the short version. So this is just an abstract. when you read the abstract, there is not such a single word that the opioids overall increase mortality. It basically says the data is heterogeneous, making a claim across the board that cannabis decreases opioid mortality is more complicated than it seems on the surface. That I agree with. But there is not a single statement that on all overall cannabis increases opioid mortality. The author simply pulled a piece of string together, a couple of sentences to make it stand, but it doesn't stand. If you analyze the whole article, it basically never says that there's an increase in opioid mortality from use of cannabis. So let's go further. Okay, there is also an article claiming that that the heavy cannabis use is associated with schizophrenia in young men. So it's associated. It is not a causality. Causality has never been proven. We do think that what's happening is that there's something called time-lead bias when heavy users of cannabis end up with a high risk of Alzheimer's because it speeds up the onset. So basically the people who would have had developed schizophrenia sooner or later, they will develop it sooner if they start using cannabis. I think that's key data, but there may be increase in schizophrenia. So that's one of the dangers. Point well taken overall. However, then to make a claim that 16 million Americans are addicted to cannabis despite 50 million users every year, which by the way translates to about a half of use of alcohol. And and you can make a lot of arguments here, and I'm going to show you data on opioids in a minute. But I'm also want to mention that if you think about from perspective of the good of the whole country, putting this lie of an article in the perspective, it's pretty clear that the cannabis is dramatically safer than alcohol. It's pretty clear that if we rapidly substitute cannabis for utilization of alcohol, we're probably going to see a much healthier society as a whole. And yes, there's pitfalls, and we could talk about pitfalls, but I don't want to do this in this article because I just want to say that the bad journalism that lies to the general public and sets us back in time is unprofessional of New York Times to allow for publication. But okay, let's do this. Let's talk about actual true evidence as to does the cannabis decrease or increase opioid mortality. So I'm going to first point out this study that was published in 2014 by a group of researchers, including my former mentor, Dr. Chinaza Cunningham, who was my preceptor, one of my teachers during residency in Montefiore in New York and Albert Einstein School of Medicine. And so they currently, actually, at some point, Dr. Cunningham was a health commissioner for New York State, and she's been very heavily involved in this topic of researching medical cannabis in the state of New York. And so they found that 25% on average decrease in mortality from painkiller overdoses when the cannabis laws are implemented. And I particularly want to show something that completely negates all of the conversation by the person who wrote the article for New York Times. And if you look into years of implementation, there is an decrease in continuous, so bigger effect of the decreased mortality. So if in the first couple of years it was hovering around 20%, but then after 4 years, you can see a dramatic decline to somewhere 30 to 35% decrease in mortality. So what we know is for a fact that there is at least 30% reduction in the overall opioid mortality in the states that legalizing medical cannabis. Now, why is this happening? Well, we understand it very well. The reason that's happening is this, is that there's a dramatic decrease in the utilization of prescribed opioids. So in 2018, JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, not some obscured economics journal, published this article titled Association Between US States Medical Cannabis Laws and Opioid Prescribing in the Medicare Part D Population, showing that on average, every day, states with active dispensaries show 3.7 million fewer daily doses filled. So if you translate, that's about 1 billion doses per year. Billion, 1 billion with a B, not with the M. And of course, that translates to a dramatic decrease in mortality, as you would expect, and that's the proof. And it's not just Medicare, same goes for Medicaid. In the same year, the same journal, and actually same edition, published the data on Medicaid, showing that in the Medicaid population, we saw a same between 6 to 6.5 roughly % reduction rate in utilization of opioids. And this information has been proven with subsequent studies too. And so there's no real discussion. So why all of a sudden a journalist who really positioned itself that this data is not true, it doesn't exist, and there is a harm, I don't know. I hope that New York Times does something to comment on not just inconsistency, but on direct lying to general public. And, you know, we wrote, Joan and I wrote this commentary to basically say, well, you know, unfortunately, if we do nothing, you know, and if we continue to block the general legalization, decriminalization, and removal of cannabis from Schedule I controlled substance, we're risking to recriminalizing cannabis and, you know, going back to the reefer madness, which was completely fabricated, and, you know, denying access to drug that is safer than alcohol, opioids, and pretty much every single other painkiller on the market, even safer than things like NSAIDs, frankly. You know, that would basically not just be backward thinking politically. I think it would basically be criminal to deny an effective pain treatment for millions and millions of Americans just because of some obscure political or personal gain for the, you know, and I don't know if this article was written on a request of Big Pharma or some politician, who knows, I don't care. But it's important that we speak against the lies, and we speak against manipulation of data that should not show up in leading journals like New York Times. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Stay tuned for what's up and coming and current in the world of integrative medicine, health, longevity, and staying well. All the best to you. Take care. Again, I'm Dr. Kogan, Medical Director of GW Center for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine at George Washington University.